Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today's story marks a moment that many believed would remain impossible for years to come. Russia's capital, the heart of political power, military command, and national symbolism, has come under direct threat. Moscow, long portrayed as untouchable and secure, now finds itself under fire as Ukraine delivers what many are calling an unthinkable blow. This development is not just another headline in an already devastating war. It is a psychological earthquake that reshapes how this conflict is viewed inside Russia, across Ukraine, and around the world. For more than 2 years, the Kremlin has worked relentlessly to keep the reality of war far from the streets of Moscow. Russian citizens were told that the conflict was distant, controlled, and necessary. State media reassured viewers that Russian defenses were impenetrable, that any threat would be neutralized long before it could reach the capital. That narrative has now been violently disrupted. Reports of strikes, explosions, air defense activity, and emergency responses in and around Moscow have shattered the sense of security that once surrounded the city. To understand why this moment is so significant, we must first understand what Moscow represents. Moscow is not just another city. It is the seat of the Kremlin, the command center of Russia's military operations, the economic core of the country, and the symbolic heart of Vladimir Putin's authority. Any threat to Moscow is perceived as a threat to the Russian state itself. That is why Ukraine's ability to reach this deeply protected space sends shockwaves far beyond the physical damage caused. The strike on Moscow is being described as surprising not only because of where it occurred, but because of how it challenges long-standing assumptions about the balance of power. Ukraine, a nation that has endured relentless missile barrages, infrastructure destruction, and civilian casualties, has demonstrated that it is not merely defending itself. It is adapting, evolving, and projecting power in ways that force Russia to confront consequences at home. As news broke of the incident, confusion spread rapidly. Flights were delayed or grounded, airspace restrictions were imposed, and emergency services were mobilized. Residents reported hearing explosions and seeing flashes in the sky, while videos began circulating online showing smoke rising over parts of the capital. Although Russian authorities moved quickly to control the narrative, the images told a story that could not be erased. For the first time in this war, many Russians were forced to confront the reality that Moscow is not immune. The Kremlin's immediate response followed a familiar pattern. Officials downplayed the damage, emphasized the effectiveness of air defense systems, and accused Ukraine and its Western allies of escalating the conflict. But beneath the official statements lies a deeper concern. The mere fact that a strike could reach Moscow raises uncomfortable questions about the state of Russia's defenses, the allocation of military resources, and the competence of those responsible for national security. For Vladimir Putin, this moment represents a serious challenge to his carefully constructed image. For decades, Putin has positioned himself as the guarantor of stability and security. His legitimacy rests not on democratic accountability, but on the promise of control. When the capital itself comes under threat, that promise begins to crack. Even if the physical damage is limited, the psychological impact is immense. Inside Russia, reactions have been mixed and telling. Some citizens express anger and demand harsher retaliation against Ukraine. Others, however, are beginning to ask quieter, more dangerous questions. Why is this happening? Why has the war reached Moscow? Why are ordinary Russians now facing the consequences of a conflict they were told would remain far away? These questions may not yet dominate public discourse, but they are spreading in private conversations, social media comments, and moments of doubt. From Ukraine's perspective, this strike represents a calculated and symbolic move. Ukrainian leaders have repeatedly argued that Russia will only reconsider its aggression when the costs become unavoidable. By demonstrating the ability to strike deep inside Russian territory, Ukraine aims to disrupt not just military operations, but the political and psychological foundations of the Kremlin's war strategy. The message is clear: no city, no matter how protected, is beyond reach. This does not mean Ukraine seeks indiscriminate destruction. On the contrary, Ukrainian officials continue to emphasize that their fight is defensive and rooted in survival. But they also recognize that deterrence requires credibility. If Russia believes it can attack Ukrainian cities without consequence, the war will continue indefinitely. By reaching Moscow, Ukraine challenges that belief head-on. The role of technology in this development cannot be overstated. Ukraine has become a global example of how innovation can level the playing field in modern warfare. Through the use of drones, precision systems, and adaptive tactics, Ukraine has managed to overcome significant disadvantages in size and resources. These tools allow strikes that were once unimaginable, forcing even major powers to rethink traditional defense strategies. The strike on Moscow also exposes potential weaknesses in Russia's air defense network. Russia has long advertised its advanced missile systems as among the best in the world. Yet recent events suggest gaps in coverage, misallocation of resources, or systemic issues such as corruption and outdated equipment. When defenses fail near the capital, confidence erodes not only among civilians, but within the military itself. International reactions to this development have been swift and cautious. Western governments are closely monitoring the situation, weighing the risks of escalation against the reality that Ukraine has the right to defend itself. Some analysts warn that strikes on Moscow could provoke more aggressive Russian responses, including intensified attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure. Others argue that this pressure is necessary to push Russia toward meaningful negotiations. The fear of escalation is real, but it must be viewed in context. Ukraine has endured years of attacks on its cities, energy systems, and civilian populations. Entire neighborhoods have been reduced to rubble. From Kiev's perspective, restraint has not prevented suffering. Instead, it has allowed Russia to continue its campaign with relative impunity. The strike on Moscow represents a shift from endurance to strategic pressure. Within the Kremlin, this moment likely triggers intense debate. Hardliners may push for stronger retaliation, increased mobilization, or expanded military operations. Others may quietly recognize that the war is becoming increasingly costly and unpredictable. The longer Moscow remains vulnerable, the harder it becomes to maintain elite cohesion and public compliance. There is also the issue of narrative control. Russian state media has long dominated the information space, shaping public perception through selective reporting and propaganda. However, the digital age makes complete control impossible. Videos recorded by civilians shared instantly across platforms undermine official narratives. Each image of smoke over Moscow chips away at the illusion of total control. For the Russian public, the strike represents a turning point in emotional terms. Fear changes how people think. When safety can no longer be taken for granted, loyalty becomes fragile. This does not mean immediate unrest or rebellion, but it introduces uncertainty into a system that depends on predictability and obedience. The global implications of this strike extend far beyond Russia and Ukraine. Other nations are watching closely, drawing lessons about deterrence, vulnerability, and modern warfare. Allies of Russia may question the strength of its security guarantees. Adversaries may feel emboldened by the demonstration that even the most fortified capitals are not invulnerable. This moment contributes to a broader reassessment of power in the international system. Humanitarian considerations must also remain at the forefront. Civilians on both sides of the conflict continue to suffer. Ukrainian families live with daily air raid sirens, displacement, and loss. Russian civilians now face a glimpse of the insecurity their government has imposed on others. While responsibility for the war lies with political leaders, ordinary people bear the consequences. As the situation unfolds, speculation about next steps intensifies. Will Ukraine continue to target symbolic locations to maintain psychological pressure? Will Russia escalate its attacks or attempt to reassert control through repression and censorship? Or could this moment serve as a catalyst for renewed diplomatic efforts, however unlikely they may seem right now? History shows that wars often change direction after moments that shatter assumptions. The belief that Moscow was untouchable was one such assumption. Its collapse does not end the war, but it changes the terms under which it is fought. Power is no longer one-sided. Fear is no longer confined to Ukraine. For Vladimir Putin, the challenge is immense. Managing a war abroad is difficult enough. Managing fear at home is far more dangerous. As Moscow faces the reality of vulnerability, the Kremlin must decide whether to double down on chaos or confront the consequences of its actions. Ukraine's message through this strike is unmistakable. It is a message of resilience, adaptation, and determination. It signals that Ukraine will not be defined solely by what it endures, but also by what it is capable of doing. Whether this leads to escalation or eventual resolution remains uncertain, but the psychological balance of the war has undeniably shifted. As we move forward, one thing is clear. Russia's capital under fire is not just a dramatic headline. It is a symbol of a war entering a new and unpredictable phase. The unthinkable has happened, and the world is watching closely to see what happens next. Thank you for staying with us for this in-depth analysis. If you found this video informative, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more updates and detailed breakdowns as this critical story continues to develop. Stay informed, stay safe, and we'll see you in the next video.